So with that, we are now live. And we would really love to welcome all of you at this event today. So good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining this webinar on learning with Google during the pandemic and beyond. We have attendees from Sri Lanka, India, and Africa. And this webinar is hosted by Yara Technologies in partnership with Google for Education. Yara Technologies Private Limited owns the Talkative Parents EdTech platform, which connects educators, teachers, parents, and students through one integrated platform consisting of a digital communication plan, online school fees, payments, e-learning, and of course, data analytics. We are very excited to have these top senior educators in Sri Lanka coming together as panelists to discuss their views on the subject matter. Let me also thank our media sponsors, LMD and Sunday Times, Education Times, who have made this event possible today. So let me first introduce to you our very eminent panel. First off, we have Asanka Perera, Sub-Warden, St. Thomas College, Mount Lavinia. We have Malith Kumarasinghe, Coordinating Principal, Wycherley International School. Professor Harshana Rambukwella, Director, Postgraduate Institute of English, as well as Gamika Seneviratne from our home team, who's a data scientist at Yara Technologies. So to begin with, we are delighted to showcase a 3-minute clip done by Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, on the Learning with Google program held in February 2021.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Learning with Google. We've been working on some really exciting things that we can't wait to show you. Learning has always been core to our mission of organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful. The two are deeply connected. Learning is what makes information useful and what enables people to apply knowledge to make things better for themselves, their families, and their communities. I know that firsthand. Growing up, my parents and teachers instilled in me a deep curiosity about the world. It's what put me on a path to bring technology to more people, and what inspired me to help build Chromebooks a decade ago. I never imagined they would be used to help students connect to virtual classrooms in a pandemic. It's been a hard year, to say the least. Yet each day, you show up and tirelessly support your students, just as you always have. On behalf of all of us at Google, let me say thank you for all you do under some really difficult circumstances. I'm proud that we've been able to help in small ways. 150 million students, educators, and school leaders globally are now using Google Classroom, up from 40 million a year ago. And we have seen teachers come together on YouTube to support each other as you work to keep students motivated and classrooms safe. The need to learn and teach from anywhere won't end, even when the pandemic does. We have an incredible opportunity to reimagine learning for what comes next. That's why last year we made learning and education a formal focus area, building on our long-term work. Our goal is to bring the best of Google to help you solve important challenges in learning and education today. That's what Learning with Google is all about, the educators, leaders, and partners around the world who are building a better future for your students and kids everywhere. Thank you for learning with us and for letting us learn from you. Now please sit back and enjoy the rest of the event.
So first off, let me call upon Asanka Perera to talk about how Google Classrooms has made an impact for him. Asanka Perera is educated at St. Thomas College, Mount Lavinia, and presently serves as a sub-warden and teacher of mathematics for O-levels. He is a qualified electric and electronic engineer from the University of Northumbria, Newcastle upon Tyne, United Kingdom. He has a passion for singing and choral music and programming embedded systems. So I'm sure with his diverse experience and being an eminent educationist in this country, I'm sure he has a lot to say. So here's to you, Mr. Asa.
Thank you, Safra, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So the topic which I was asked to elaborate on was how Google Classroom was implemented at St. Thomas's and our success story, basically. So before I get on to Google Classroom, I'd like to begin our journey, the journey which began during the first lockdown in March 2020. We never thought it was going to be a lockdown or we will not have school for so long. But when we did lockdown in September, in March, I was given some reliable information that this lockdown, which started off in March, would perhaps go on for a little longer and up till even September. But we now know it's far longer than that. But as soon as I heard that, my mind started working. I thought we must look at tools where we can get online, because keeping school closed for that long amount of time, it's not healthy for the students. Anyway, so what started off there basically got me experimenting a lot of platforms out there. I've experimented at least 5 or 6 platforms. But finally, but it all had its advantages and disadvantages, but finally settled on Google Classroom for a few reasons. I'll elaborate a little later. But we stuck with Google Classroom. Now, St. Thomas's already had a student management system where all the students are registered, where we have the academics monitored. We can see progression of the students right through the years in terms of their grades, in terms of their extracurricular activities. But something we did not have was a learning management system. And basically two-way communication where the teacher can set an assignment for the student can answer that assignment, and then a teacher can give feedback. Now, that was not something we had. But this is where Google Classroom came into our aid, and that is what we've now implemented, and now we have it fully fledged and integrated into our system, where we're running it at the same time. Although we started physical school, we're running it at the same parallelly as well. So I made an application to Google, took a few weeks, but then finally we were allowed a free of charge access to G Suite for education. Now, G Suite is what it used to be called. It's now called Google Workspace. We immediately created accounts for staff, for students. For the first time in the history of St. Thomas's, or basically history of any school, I guess, we were able to get all the students, even as young as grade 1, where 6 years of age. We created email accounts where all our communication happens through that. Obviously, the parents are accessing those email accounts, but that email account will stick with them right through through their years in the school, and where official communication can happen through that, which is another learning step for the boys. Anyway, so overnight almost we went from a paper tradition to a paperless tradition, and where all our emails now was handled through Google. We started using Google Classroom, where teachers were able to upload study material. So we used to do a class, we used to record that class and upload it to the Google Classroom. So if by chance, I mean, there were plenty of boys who couldn't join in because they had data issues or power cuts in the area or whatever. They could always go onto the Google Classroom, access the material, watch the video, access the notes from the classroom. So these are all things which happened. We were able to do a set assignments, mark and give them feedback, conduct online classes, whatnots, right? Everything which none of this we would have thought were possible had it not been for the dreaded virus. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but this virus basically pushed us all into the deep end and said, learn to swim, and that's what we did. Right. I'm not too sure if you have, but if you haven't, there's something we should definitely try is Google Forms, where you can assign quizzes. Now, this is fantastic, especially for someone like me, where I don't like marking books so much. I shouldn't be heard saying that, but where you get the system marking it for you, right? So so you can set the quiz where you have the answers already set out, get the children to answer it, and they have fun doing it as well, right? But to be marked automatically was a godsend because of the numbers of students we were handling. I've even tried an escape room for the students through Google Forms, and that was fabulous. Yes, it takes a lot of imaginative skills for that, but once you group the students into various groups and get them passing through the various stages and going from one room to another room to another room until they can come out of that room. So it was just fantastic, and even if I do say so myself, I know the boys enjoyed that thoroughly. Um, and also the Google platform, because of the fact that there are a lot of developers out there who develop things for the Google platform. There's a lot of flexibility, and although some platforms, I'm not going to name names, but some platforms were limited to perhaps 4 video screens or 9 video screens, some even up to 25. Google, through their add-ons, allowed you to go up as high as 100, right? So you're in a classroom. You'd like to see all the faces of the students. You want to make sure that they are paying attention, not falling asleep, right? So these are some of the additions which you got through Google. Our boys have started experimenting with other applications connected to Google, and they're looking at creating websites, running Google scripts for making the mundane things a little interesting. We have databases, forms being created, and a lot of things which are happening thanks to Google Classroom and thanks to G Suite. But of course, nothing comes without its challenges. And of course, there were a lot of challenges we had to get through. One of the biggest challenges were for us where students and the teachers did not have the devices to get online. A lot of our old boys contributed, a lot of our parents contributed. We shared our devices with each other. We managed to do something to get everyone online. But that was one of our biggest challenges, where some were able to. I mean, if a teacher would have had a smartphone, but it's not, you can't do a good class with a smartphone, or you need a laptop or a good device to do that. So those are some of the things, problems we had as the biggest challenge. The second challenge we had was getting our teachers and students trained on how to use these tools. That took quite a lot of work, where we got everyone together in batches, where we had to do trainings, where we had to do workflows, do documents, help documents. This is how to get it done, step-by-step material. Anyway, so all that was done, and we are happy to announce that all our staff and students stepped up to their mark, and were able to come up to speed and up to standard. Now, having Google Classroom at first, and having a schooling online at first, was a fabulous, novel idea, which everyone got on board. Everyone was just happy. It was just new. It was a new experience. Students were scrambling to come online. Parents were happy to see school beginning. Teachers were happy to do the classes. But as time went on, digital fatigue started kicking in. And the more classes we had, the more we saw that the boys were tired, the teachers were tired, and they were really, really struggling, right? Now, in our case, we took a conscious decision to not have 8 periods in a day, right? Otherwise we'd have started off at 7:30 and end up at 1:30, but 8 periods a day on digital did not make sense to us. So what we did was to have 5 periods, 5 40-minute periods, separated by 20-minute breaks. So the students and teachers had a time to go and get a glass of water, rest their eyes, just stretch their legs, or they would be just glued to the screen, which is very, very, very unhealthy, especially for the young ones. And then we made sure, again, a conscious decision, we made sure that we do not encroach onto the personal time of both students and teachers. The usual school finishes at 1:30, and so after 1:30, we made it a point we did not disturb either students or teachers unless there was a very important meeting we had to have, but otherwise we would not go beyond 1:30. But even after doing all that, there was a lot of tiredness to be seen, and towards about February of this year, that's when we saw it peaking, where boys were really tired and teachers were really tired. So now, although school has begun, in stages at least, but since school has begun, we do still continue to use Google Classroom to set assignments, to do projects, because boys, at the end of the day, we are training them for the next stage of their lives, and they will. We've passed the point where you need to look at log tables to find out how to do a calculation, right? Everything is available as online tools or computer tools or whatever. So we need to train them for that future, and that future, which can be seen right now. We need to train them to reach that area where they can do their own Google searches, find information for themselves, be independent. So this, the pandemic, although horrible as it is, it gave that rise for that bit of independence for the students, and that we're happy with. So we do continue to use Google Classroom, but we want to expand on it and bring those tools which were available online, bring it into the classrooms, so to make the classrooms as creative as possible. That's it from me. I hope that answers that give a bit of an overview of into Google Classrooms and the success stories of St. Thomas's. Of course, it comes with its challenges, but I think we manage to do our best.
Thank you, Asanka. I think you gave a very realistic view of what it was like, what the benefits are, and what things that they need to look out for when it actually happens. So I feel like I'm sure they took a lot from what you said, and it's a great precursor to what we have next. Because Malith Kumarasinghe, who's the coordinating principal at Wycherley International School, he is called the agent of change and a transformation leader in the education sector of Sri Lanka. With over 15 years of experience in the field, he has managed schools in different parts of the country with varied student, parent, and teacher backgrounds, and schools with different types of unique challenges. He has handled cultural changes and bringing about continuous improvements, quality assurance, and while making sure he motivates stakeholders. So Malith, could you tell us a little bit about how the education segment can benefit from embracing this blended learning model? And what is it post this pandemic era?
Thank you, Safra, and good evening, everyone. I hope all are keeping well and safe. I'm not going to dwell too much on the theme of the webinar. I think Safra and Asanka already covered that. But before I dive into the exact topic that I have been given, I'll touch on a few other areas which I feel the audience would benefit from. I think first of all, what we need to establish is the fact that no one was ready for all these changes at the same time. From the way we buy things, how we travel, to how we do business transactions, how we communicate, pretty much everything changed in our lives overnight. Somewhere around March 13th or 14th, thereabout, in 2020, everything changed. And it was no different for the education sector in our country as well. I mean, things became unusually challenging, I would say, due to a large number of factors. Like, some of the teachers were not very familiar with technology. Some didn't, some parents and teachers didn't have access to technology at all in some parts of the country. I mean, if you look at areas like Mayangana, Anuradhapura, there are schools where, some of the kids haven't even seen a tablet or a laptop. So I think, it was very, very challenging. Like Asanka correctly mentioned, I think internet quality, device availability, and ICT awareness were very daunting challenges for us as Lankans. But, Safra, the amazing thing about the Lankan population is we have a knack for, laughing off at anything and getting away. I mean, we are a country who have, got bashed by a 40-year war, the tsunami, to oil fiasco, to, beauty queens being overthrown, whatever comes our way, we laugh it off and we take up a good beating and we move on. That I think as islanders, we have an amazing knack for resilience. And I think it proved vital in this scenario. And Sri Lankans quickly adapted and did their best, in my opinion. And when it came to my staff at Wycherley Gampaha, they were simply amazing. I mean, they adjusted to the new norm and technology virtually in a matter of days. How amazing is it, Safra, when you have teachers who are like, sometimes 60 years old, who didn't have a Yahoo or a Google account or didn't know how to type on Word, suddenly, a few weeks later, teaching on Google. How crazy is that? I mean, that's the kind of like love Lankan teachers have for teaching. And I think, hats off to them. They are the unsung heroes. I think everyone really admired the doctors and the armored forces. They did a fabulous job too. But having said that, teachers were real unsung heroes. I did not, unfortunately, see any post on any of these electronic media acknowledging what the teachers have done. So I take this opportunity to thank all the people who are involved with the education sector in our country for keeping the country going. When the kids are really happy and learning, only a country can really move forward. So I actually would like to thank all the stakeholders who are involved, from top, middle level to bottom. You need all the stakeholders to come on board, starting from our chairman Dr. Jagat Talvis to CEO Dr. Punarjeeva, Mr. Sarvanan, and my team, and even the parents and the kids. I mean, if the kids and the parents did not buy what we were offering, it would have failed. For any change to work out, your stakeholders need to buy what you are selling. So when we went for those changes, I really appreciate the fact that all of them embraced it in a positive manner. Coming specifically to the topic that you wanted me to address, Safra, which is how embracing blended learning can really benefit post-pandemic era. I think, like what Asanka mentioned correctly, there were many negative things with the pandemic. I mean, so much of death, so much of uncertainty, global, markets crashing, people unable to buy, food. I mean, not everyone had, smartphones in their head. Not everyone knew about e-commerce. Everything was quite challenging. Having said that, there were many positives which came out. Okay, one big positive that happened was, teachers and children learning and to present, solutions and answers in a novel way. Teachers, became very innovative through online teaching, and so did the children. And there were kind of like psychological changes as well. If you look at a traditional classroom, Sri Lankan teachers are quite uncomfortable with implementing what we call a flipped classroom, where you turn the tables around and the kids get involved with the teaching. But when it came to blended learning or online learning or teaching, teachers were quite comfortable with letting the students take the mantle and go forward. Same way, there were enough and more students, which I think any educator will verify, who were very, kind of like backward when it comes to giving answers in a physical classroom. If a teacher is asking a question, they'll never answer. But here you had those students coming forward, answering well, kind of like, being engaged. So they were very good things with blended learning. And also there were situations where, teachers kind of like got experimental. Teachers who were not very comfortable with PowerPoints and videos started incorporating them and augmenting the teaching. And even students got very creative. There were students who even sent their answers through homemade videos and podcast and PowerPoints, and they were clearly engaging more. And through that, their kind of like confidence grew as well. I mean, some of the so-called backbenchers, kids who were like performing poorly in a traditional background did very well on the online platform. Teachers were telling some of the kids who didn't, answer a single question, loved, filling up stuff on a Google form survey. So I think students kind of like got heavily involved with internet for education. I'll put it that way. Kids traditionally, who were like into gaming and music only, through the internet kind of like, got involved with education. They started doing a lot of research. And also there were other kind of like other benefits which came through this particular online teaching arrangement. For example, Safra, like when you think from a sustainability point of view and from, cost and, all those things, think about the amount of environmental pollution that came down. When transportation reduced, the cost structures changed, suddenly children were eating home cooked food while they were learning online. Kids went from McDonald's to eating malung at home, just like that. Okay, in some cases it wasn't option to.
I don't know if you'll be happy about that, but yes.
Yes, but those were some of the good things which came out of the pandemic too. And I think even in terms of child safety, parents were far more happier when online teaching was happening, Safra, because like when kids go on public transport, something bad could happen. So many positive things came out of blended learning, okay, or rather what we call this online teaching. So I think the way forward should be, maybe, we need to have a structure where school doesn't maybe have to be 5 days a week in future. It could be maybe, they are coming for certain critical components and the balance portion being done at home. Okay, it can be modified up to a certain extent like that. And still for all, just like what Asanka mentioned, even I have told my teachers to maintain certain components on Google Classroom, even though we have started physical classes again. Because I think handling technology and learning through technology is the way forward. So I think it's very important that we continue with that particular model and go ahead. And I think we all know the benefits of Google Classroom already. It's kind of like paperless. You can incorporate a lot of enriched items onto Google Drive. There's Google Form survey, and you can do online assignments, and kids can track their work and assignments better. All the parents are on board. I mean, they'll be aware of the announcements that we make. In fact, Safra, the real funny thing is, in the past in Sri Lanka, there would have been enough and more parents sometimes who are unaware of their child's grade or what subjects are doing. Now that the Google emails are going to their mailbox, they're very much aware of all the activities being done day to day. So that's a very good news. And also parents have a clear idea about the announcements that we make. Some of those announcements can be very critical, and it needs to be, it needs to reach out to them on time. So those are very good things. So I think really the Google Classroom is an amazing platform. That's the bottom line, where I think we can't thank enough Google for coming up with a product like that. It's kind of like importance was so significant during this COVID time. And I think it's a real game changer, to be frank. I think Google Classroom and such platforms should continue into the future as well, because it will make learning possible in all corners of the world, irrespective of whatever challenges that will come in the future. I mean, a similar scenario can come easily again. It could be another virus or kind of like a, I don't know, maybe like a global level war, whatever comes. I think Google Classroom will be able to kind of like ensure that education happens no matter what. So I think thanks to Yara Technologies for, kind of like promoting Google for education in Sri Lanka. And I would also like to thank all of you all for inviting me this evening, and to the audience for listening to me patiently. And let me also make this an opportunity to wish everyone for the new year, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Malith. I think definitely Google Classrooms has a lot of advantages, and now with the boom of the internet, as you say, there could even be possibilities of students from Sri Lanka learning from students from other countries. I think I know of a school, I think in Australia, where they invited ministers from other countries to actually join their classes. So I feel, and then they felt very involved, and they kept asking, these were small kids who kept asking them questions about how do they want to feel, what do they want from the world over the next few years. So these are things that we would not be able to do without technology, like you said. So thank you so much for giving us a little insight on your experience with the technology. So with that, we bring in a very eminent panelist once again. He is Professor Harshana Rambukwella. He's the Director of Postgraduate Institute of English. He's a literary historian and comparative literature scholar who also researches and publishes in sociolinguistics. He is the author of The Politics and Poetics of Authenticity, a cultural genealogy of Sri Lanka singular nationalism, UCL Press 2018, and has authored several articles and chapters on literature, language, and cultural studies. He is a research fellow at the Institute of Advanced Social Studies and Humanities at the University of Edinburgh and the Sri Lankan chair at the University of Heidelberg, Germany. He has served on numerous national literary juries in Sinhala and English and is a trustee of the Gratian Trust. Professor Harshana Rambukwella, can you give us a perspective on how education institutions can continue to leverage on Google Classrooms post this pandemic?
Thank you very much, Safra. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, you are very clear.
Okay, all right. And thank you to Yara Technologies for inviting me as well. And thank you to the two speakers who went before me for sharing their insights. I think we heard from two very different contexts, but in a way something similar as well. So if we go to the Postgraduate Institute of English, my own institution, the story was very similar. I mean, we were using digital technology, online technology to some extent, but the pandemic forced us to adapt it almost 100%. One difference, of course, because we are in tertiary education and we do basically mostly professional teacher training at the postgraduate level. And because we are placed in the open and distance education model at the Open University of Sri Lanka, we had a much better grasp of handling distance education. So while the technology, the platform changed, some of the pedagogical principles, the learning principles of how to teach students who are physically distant from you was something that we knew. So for instance, if you are recruited to the Open University, you have to go through this course where we are given guidance on how to write course material for distance education, where the course material becomes a substitute for the teacher in a sense. So it's actually called bridging the gap in the sense, bridging the physical distance between the teacher and the student, as well as the conceptual gap as well. Right. So now, so I won't go too much into the adoption of the technology. We chose Google primarily because as a state public sector institution, we can't suddenly deviate from our annual planned budget, for instance. So Open University already had G Suite for education, which was not being utilized at the moment because we have a parallel system called Moodle, an open access system, which is pretty good, but it has a very steep learning curve and it's fairly cumbersome to use. So Google Classroom presented a much easier, much less of a learning curve for everyone concerned, the teachers, the students, etc. So the transition was fairly smooth in that sense. So that's the main reason we adapted it. And I also echo the other speakers in thanking Google for making that product available for education institutions, particularly in a context like ours in the developing world. The fact that it was accessible free made a huge difference. I mean, if we had to pay for each account, it's not something that we could have done. So technologically, that part of the story, I think, has been told well. I just want to make a couple of observations. One is that initially when the pandemic hit and we started going online, what most education institutes, including schools as well as universities, did was what we call remote teaching, remote online teaching, right? Or emergency online teaching, it's sometimes called. So essentially, we were trying to substitute the classroom space through delivery of lectures online, which could be recorded, viewed later, or done live. Then once the LMSs, the learning management systems, were set up, we could then kind of give a more enriched experience to the students by putting up quizzes, interactive activities, etc. But I think one thing that still has not been perhaps grasped fully is that you can't replicate the physical classroom online. You need to rethink the pedagogical approach that you take, right? So that's something that we did consciously. So for instance, we had 3-hour lectures usually in class. So we drastically reduced that to 1 hour because we realized online retention time is not going to be like that. But for the 2 hours that we lost, we added a pre-class and a post-class session. So in a way, we were trying to do that flipped classroom model where the pre-class material that we share, which could be written material, audio, video, etc., gives the content of the lesson, and then try to convert the actual lesson into a more kind of a discussion forum where you have a Socratic kind of critical exchange with the student. But of course, again, now one of the things we have to realize is also there are learning cultures, particularly in Sri Lanka and particularly in South Asia and Asia in general. I have also taught in Hong Kong. Getting students to engage and discuss is very, very challenging, even though we were dealing with adult students, and it was made even more difficult by the online mode. For various technical issues as well as other, I think, environmental issues, people choose to keep their videos switched off, their microphones switched off, and there's very little interaction. So for the teacher also, it can be quite an alienating experience. So that was one problem that we had. And I don't think we have successfully addressed that completely. But one thing we have done is we have sort of this 3-partite structure now: pre-class, class, post-class. And it's tied to assessment as well, so that the student, it's not optional, so students have to engage. So this is one model that we adapted. Now, and as the other said, I mean, Google Forms, for instance, gives, I mean, it was actually originally a survey tool, Google Forms, but with the, it gives amazing functionality. You can do multiple choice, you can do short answer quizzes. Then you get the option of telling the student immediately once the quiz is done where they went wrong, where they went right. You can give feedback. So I think it's very good, and Google is very easy to set up, and it's very intuitive. If you've used Chrome, the Chrome browser, etc., you can easily browse that system. That sort of whole Google ecology has a very similar design. So now, in terms of how do we use this post-pandemic, I think one thing we have to take into account is the equity issue. Now, when we're talking particularly even at the university level, even at the undergraduate level, equity remains a massive, massive problem. There are students who don't have access, who can't afford the data, don't have the technology. And you also have to think of the social environment in which learning takes place. So not everybody comes from a stable middle class home where you have a separate room to which you can go and follow classes. Some people live in massive sort of extended families, and that environment is simply not conducive to learning. Right. So school was actually a very important reprieve for people from disadvantaged backgrounds like that, where the brighter students who didn't have an environment where they could study at home, school was actually kind of a safe haven. So COVID robbed them of that. Right. And it's the same with universities as well. I mean, I studied in a Sri Lankan university at Peradeniya. I knew many of my colleagues came from very underprivileged backgrounds, but the university, the Peradeniya residential experience was something that gave them the space to reinvent themselves in a way that they couldn't in their home environment. So that is not something we can replicate online, right? So we need to keep that very consciously, because education at the end of the day is not, I mean, this is now accepted worldwide. It's not just about the head. It's not just about cognitive activities. You're not programming computers that are going to perform functions after that. You're dealing with social bodies that interact with each other, right? And whether at the secondary or the tertiary or the primary level, that social interaction is very, very important. Which is why also in Sri Lanka, you have such a big scramble by parents to get students into the so-called national colleges or to the elite schools, because parents intuitively know that the child will get a whole person education in an environment like that. Right? It's the same with the university as well. University to some extent may be less, and I don't want to generalize because there are certain maybe very specific profession-oriented courses which can be fairly effectively delivered almost entirely online, because they do not require that same kind of engagement. So, but leaving those aside, now for the university, now one of the things that trouble me is that, yes, we made the pandemic an opportunity, and I think that was a very good thing to do, and that's how we should meet challenges. But when we call the pandemic an opportunity, we cannot forget that Sri Lankan education, whether it's secondary or higher education, was in a deep crisis before the pandemic. The pandemic came on top of that. We have a very under-resourced school system. We have a very under-resourced university system, where lots of things are lacking. The human resource training, the actual physical resources are lacking. So this has actually exacerbated that. So if we are moving ahead with greater digitalization of our education ecology, there has to be a state level policy orientation change. For instance, we need to have a very stable, easily accessible internet system available to everybody at an affordable price or even free for the public school system. Then access to devices, right? Those things have to be ensured. Then at the same time, we need like an enormous amount of teacher training. Yes, teachers have adapted quite significantly, but my problem is this: it's not just doing a PowerPoint, a nice PowerPoint. You need to know the pedagogical conceptual framework behind which you do that. There are learning theories. You need to know how to apply those to that context and change it. So that kind of transition takes time. You can't do it in one day or even in a month. It takes time, and the learning culture also has to change. The students' learning culture also has to change. Of course, we have been forced to change, but whether that's all positive, I don't know, because we need to track. For instance, educational outcome is not something that you can track immediately. A student takes a few years to face an exam, so a few years to go out into the working world. So the impact of this, I'm not so positive. I don't know how this will impact a generation or two of our students. We have to see. And another thing, I'm maybe old-fashioned in this way, I feel the rapidity with which we embrace change today is maybe too much. We particularly with things like education, these are long-term investments that we make. It's the policy decisions that were made in the 1940s, 60s that has allowed Sri Lanka to reach the stage it is today. We have 99% literacy or 90% literacy or something like that. And our public health sector system is excellent, and that literacy and public health sector is tied together. It's because when you do the medical messaging, people are smart enough, people are literate enough to understand the medical message. They don't run a mile when they see a vaccine syringe coming at them. They don't run a mile when contraception is proposed to them or something like that. They don't hit the public, they don't chase away the public health official. Now that is possible because of social investments that were made 40, 50 years ago, right? So I think we have this problem now that we want results very quickly, and we have a very short-term vision about education planning. So if we are transitioning to, in a serious way, to a digitalized form of online form of education, there are a number of factors that we need to consider. Having said all of this, now at the PGIE, we will continue with a hybrid model, something similar to what Malith said, because we have a largely working population, and in practical terms, and we have teachers dispersed from all over the country. We have people from Jaffna, Ampara, etc. studying in our programs. So the online delivery method has been quite effective in that sense. They find it much easier. But at the same time, there are certain segments that we believe need to be done in class. For instance, the teacher practicum, where teachers have to be practically trained to face challenges and scenarios within a classroom, is very difficult to replicate online. Of course, now the practicum maybe should include an online part as well, because that's part of the teaching reality now. So that will be taken into consideration. But So there are issues like that. So when we think about the future and how education will be transformed, I don't really know. I mean, I think globally there will be a shift, whether we like it or not. Whether the outcome of that will be positive or not, I'm not entirely sure, because also I come from the social sciences and humanities, where value education is what really matters to us. And in a whatever said and done, this medium has a certain level of alienation, which you can't get the same energy, the same passion, the same dynamic that you get in a classroom. So that for me is still remains a challenge. Having said that, as I said, we will be definitely using Google into certainly the medium-term future, where we will be sort of using this as a supplement that enriches the educational experience of the students who come to the PGIE. So that they, and anyway, because we are a distance education organization, that allows us a very powerful means of engaging the student when the student is no longer there with us physically, because even when they're at their homes, we can keep them engaged. So in that sense, yes. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harshana, for that. It was very insightful, and I learned quite a bit just from that very short conversation. If you have any questions from the audience, please feel free to put it in the chat box so that I can raise it up during the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, again, place it on the chat box, and then I will collate whatever is there, as well as the questions that were sent to us in advance, and we can definitely ask the panelists here, and I'm sure they will be ready to answer with a smile on their face. So with that, we come to our next speaker. Gamika is a data scientist and head of product development at Yara Technologies. He has 7 years of experience in edtech, fintech, and investment research sectors. He has significant experience in data analytics, having led projects in artificial intelligence, including design, deployment in mobile devices, and machine learning algorithms. He has coded complex algorithms, including those for image recognition, natural language processing, and a variety of classical supervised, unsupervised machine learning tasks. As you can see from his description, he's going to definitely keep us engaged in terms of how you can use data and make sure that your classroom integration is done well. So he is pushed through that with a master's degree in electronic and electrical engineering from Imperial College London, and is also a CFA charter holder. So Gamika, can we have a little insight on data analytics in the education sector and the Google Classroom TP integration?
Absolutely, Safra. And I would like to take a minute, to thank Professor Harshana, Asanka, and Malith for the very detailed, practical side view of how we use Google and how schools adapted to their usage. And I can't at any level of depth in comparison to you provide the practical aspects of that. But what I will do is I'll give you an overview of how artificial intelligence as a tool is being used to further education, edtech in general. So, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll try and break up a few segments for you in that. So, the first tool that artificial intelligence for education can be used is what we call interactive learning, and I think Asanka and Malith, going on explaining about Google Forms, for example. But interactive learning is in a sense where the student can interact with the content, and it will provide real-time feedback. So, you're doing an essay and you answer a particular question, and it will give you the instant marks, or it will give you direction, it will help you guide. So it's more engaging as a method of learning. Another, and this is what we believe as the holy grail of education, is personalized or adaptive learning. In adaptive learning, what happens is there's the algorithms that run in the back end carefully track how a student learns, right? How a student answers, his style of answering, for example. and it adapts the way in which it poses the questions and the content of the questions and the severity, the difficulty or the easiness of the questions to help this student, to guide this student in his or her learning abilities, right? That's, I mean, Google with its Google Workspace account is pioneering some of these initiatives in this particular field. And so that's the second one. And I would say automation. So, I mean, whenever you talk about artificial intelligence, one of the main things, apart from the terminate aspects of it, that comes out is the automation. I mean, how will this affect jobs? How will this increase efficiency, productivity, and all the rest of it? So, of course, automation, you can basically divide it into 2 points, and that is in terms of the admin burden, reducing the admin burden, and reducing the sort of grading, scoring burden. So, I mean, reading some of the surveys that you get, one from Telegraph, if I am not mistaken, you have roughly a teacher's time spent about 50 to 60% arguably teaching, and about 25 to 20% scoring and grading, and the remaining 10 to 15% on the admin related tasks. So this is about 40-45% of the average teacher's time that you can save up, so that you can help the teachers do what they're good at, which is teaching, essentially. So I mean, if you're looking at the administrative level stuff, I mean, you can get algorithms to learn the patterns by which you, say, for example, schedule online classes, look for slots that are available, and then schedule a class, invite the particular students, send out meeting requests, etc. That's an example of how admin related automation can help. The other one is scoring and grading. I think Asanka mentioned this with the quizzes, right, in Google Form, which once you set up the answers, you can get even 1,000 students to answer, and the answers will be set out. That's the level one of it. But what if you, for example, in higher end degrees, you need to mark reports and in-depth comprehensions, thematics, etc. That requires the algorithms to really understand, even at a semantic level, what is in the content, essentially. So does it contain the right logic and structure? Does it contain the right content? Is it answered in the right place? At least a first level filter for what may be required, and that's where scoring and grading related startups from Silicon Valley are trying to crack that boundary to help teachers make progress there. So that's the admin side of it. And finally, I would say it's the data analysis. So I mean, again, artificial intelligence can be used as a tool to analyze a vast array of data, so that you can derive insights that are not easily visible or extractable by human eyes, essentially. So again, I would break that down into what we call grade mining for grade and score performances, and for very specific student learning level attributes. So I mean, to elaborate a little bit more in depth there. So mining, I mean, some of our schools here, like Asanka and Malith said, already do this to a certain extent. They closely track the progression of each individual student over their time at school. So what you'd be tracking, looking at each individual students, for example, maths grade, what is it consistent, what's the volatility like, how did they do in relation to the rest of their class, rest of the school, how are the teachers performing. So that's mining at a data analysis level. And for analysis of data from a specific, sorry, I think my lights went, so you won't be able to see me, but I'll continue if that's all right. Yeah. So I mean, from a specific student level attribute, you will be able to understand what are the styles of learning. How do these students, for example, understand, how do they answer these questions? How do we post these particular questions in this particular way? So that is more granular at an individual level. how you would answer these, understand how a student learns. So that, I mean, that, for example, that captures the gamut of the main fields of artificial intelligence that is out there. Now, I mean, it sounds very rosy and out there to be as a start, but like Asanka and Malith and Harshana really mentioned, there are many practical applications. There are many practical issues concerning this, and primarily it's going to be down to the internet connection and your hardware capabilities, right? So I hope that answers your question. It's an enormous topic, obviously vast array, but I hope I captured some of what you're looking for.
Thank you so much for giving us such entertaining insight, along with facing a power cut. So we can see your dedication there, right there.
It's like a strobe lighting. Yeah.
Yeah, we can definitely see your dedication right there. So with that brings us to the Q&A session. Before that, I would like to thank our sponsors, LMD, who have been an integrated part of this event. They're the exclusive business magazine partner. They revolve around the company's flagship publication, Lanka Monthly Digest. They are self-styled as Sri Lanka's voice of business, which was launched in August 1994, marking the dawn of a new era in business journalism in Sri Lanka. So we would like to thank you and give them a shout out for being part of this event today. So with that, we go into our Q&A. And I would like to ask Professor Rambukwella, given the higher adoption in the education institutions during this pandemic, would it make sense to explore a digital university model, making university education geographically desirable across the country?
Okay, thank you, Safra. I think I kind of partly touched on that in my previous comments as well. I think there are two sides to this. One is that it's inevitable, it's coming. Whether we like it or not, certain aspects of university education will now increasingly be delivered online. And that's will also create a kind of cross-border university systems or cross-national, I don't want to call it international, where sort of national boundaries may not matter so much, right? And institutes also may use this ability to get, say, very eminent faculty from other parts of the world to deliver content in local programs. So I can see that coming. Now, whether that means we can transition to university education in terms of like a digital university education, I'm very hesitant to comment on that, primarily for the reasons that I raised there. Because one is we need to then really rethink what we mean by education. Because for me, I'm in that way I said maybe I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that sense, but for me still the university, there is a classical idea of the university for me as a space that creates certain, I mean, this can be engineering, this can be the medical professions where highly professionally focused courses as well. I'm not just talking about social science, geography, philosophy, no, right? But even for an engineering professional, you take particularly something like Sri Lanka, you need a certain kind of social consciousness, a social conscience in order to produce an engineer who can respond to the kind of crises that we encounter, for instance, the environmental crisis in this country that we are facing now. Now, a very generic model of engineering education is not going to cut it, which is why now the US, even though it's one of the champions of private higher education, if you go to any of the big liberal colleges, all the engineering, the technology, science and technology courses have a liberal arts component. because there's always been recognition that that is a very critical part of any kind of training. So for me, there's a worry when we go digital, whether those are the kinds of things that will get compromised, because it's easy to teach certain kinds of things online. So for instance, a theorem or some kind of very theoretically oriented segment, but the kind of other kinds of education where you require a much more deeper, passionate kind of engagement, I'm not sure whether that is going to be possible. So my answer, I can't give you a clear answer, because one is, it is inevitable, it's coming. Whether I can shout from the rooftop, but that's not going to stop that it's coming, right? So where we position ourselves in that, I don't know, and whether that is a desirable outcome, I'm also not entirely sure. I think there's because one of the things that's already happened is that university education has undergone radical changes, which are not necessarily for very positive from where I stand. But then again, that is a reality that we inhabit, and that is a reality we have to live with as well. But I don't know. So, but from a purely practical point of view, I'll just go to my institute. Post-pandemic, yes, we are definitely going to continue using Google Classroom and perhaps other LMSs as well to enrich the kind of learning experience that our students receive, primarily because we are engaged in professional adult education where students' time needs to be very flexible. And this gives us that flexibility, which the student likes and we like as well. So in that sense, yes. But whether that is a model that can be upscaled to cover, to replicate a university education in its entirety, is not a question that I'm very comfortable answering. And I think it needs a lot of more debate and discussion before we move into something like that. So thank you very much again for inviting me. Unfortunately, I need to leave now, so please excuse me.
Thank you so much for taking the time off to be here within your very busy schedule, I'm sure. So with that, let's not keep everyone waiting. So the next question that I have is for Asanka. In a post-pandemic era, what would be the ideal blended learning model? What percentage of time should we allocate for, say, physical and online? And how do you think that model would work?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer, because I don't think there's one size fits all. As Professor Harshana was saying, that I think there needs to be a lot more debate to decide on what works best. Having said that, I'll give you a couple of personal experiences. Right now, if you must know that because our classes have more than 15 students, we can only bring 15 at a time. So having a class of 15 and teaching a class of 15 is basically, for a teacher, it's heaven, right? Because there's only 15 boys in a class. You can almost give individual attention to each of those 15 boys. That it works out very well. But we've also tried hybrid, where you teach the physical 15 while another 15 has joined online. I must tell you very frankly, that's one of the toughest things a teacher will have to do. Because it's very difficult to concentrate on two things, right? It's difficult to concentrate on the 15 boys in front of you and the 15 boys who joined online, to see, did they hear what I said? Is the internet connection working? Are my presentations being shown properly? To split your mind to do two things, it's very, very difficult. So I'm not, whilst I'm not 100% sure that a hybrid situation where 15 boys, or half the classes in school and half the classes at home is ideal. What I would work on is half every other grade, perhaps the grades 1, 3, and 5 are in school, while 2, 4, 6 are at home doing online classes, and the exchange, they alternate on a weekly basis. Perhaps that's something which is a workable model. But if you ask me for a percentage, it's not a question I am able to answer off the cuff.
That's completely fine. So with that, we go to our next question, which is for Malith. Do you think sophisticated platforms such as Google Classrooms or any of those are suited for these developing countries such as Sri Lanka? Like how do you think the intake of such a platform has been?
Good question, Safra. I think it's a bit of a tricky question as well. Sophistication is, how shall I say, more of a comparative term. What is sophisticated for me might not be for another. So that's challenge number one with that question. And the other thing being, I think Google Classroom is quite good, provided people do have the basic knowledge when it comes to IT. I think if people have been given the basic knowledge on how to create a Google account and how to use that platform, then it would be effective. So then there comes the question concerning each developing nation on device availability, internet quality, ICT awareness, and so on and so forth. So I think what I have encountered is like at Wycherley, when it came to Google Classroom, teachers were initially educated on how to handle the basics of the platform. I think if you start off with the basics, it's kind of like a self-learning tool. You can actually grapple around with it along with time and overcome the so-called complications or the sophistications. But for that to happen, you need to play along with it for quite some time. And now, when it comes to the initial phases, even I had a bit of, a challenging time, like how do I monitor everything that's happening? But after a while, you do realize it's very simple. It's very simple because you can see the class timetables. You can see that there's a separate zone for the Zoom links. And then you can see the chat boards where children are communicating with each other. So I think the main challenge for a developing nation would be in terms of, the device availability and the kind of like, whether we can educate all the parties involved to kind of like, play around with it adequately. So I think if that particular challenge can be overcome, there is no huge complication with Google Classroom. And I think Google is kind of like, providing 24/7 support. Each person, whatever the issue that they are having with the platform, they can kind of like get one-to-one feedback from them. So each user's caliber would be different. I mean, there would be someone, struggling with, making a timetable and putting it up. Whereas, like what Gamika mentioned, there may be another user, looking into more complicated, outputs from the platform, maybe even, looking at the possibility of augmenting the algorithm in it. So it depends on the user. But I suppose it's quite challenging for a developing nation. Having said that, Safra, something that I would like to add here, Harshan already touched on it, which is, I think it's still for all very important that, kids do go physically to college. That's something very important because end of the day, schools will provide something that online education sometimes cannot do, in terms of giving structure to life, disciplining them, learning to communicate with kids from, various social backgrounds and so on. So I think considering all this, there is no harm in having Google Classroom in a developing nation. It should be there, okay? And with technology only, the population will get pushed to improve. So it is a must to have, but at the, how we are going to implement it, the rate of implementation needs to be decided by each college depending on the resource availability and the nature of the school community in that developing nation. So that's my view on that particular question. Thank you.
Completely agreed. So moving on, as we've all been speaking about this hybrid model, so find that unique solution that works for your school and your students in your area, because different areas may have different requirements in terms of technology and how much they would be willing to get on board with it. So with that, I would also like to once again thank our partners, Sunday Times and Education Times, for being our print media partner for this webinar. The Education Times is a one-stop solution for people from all walks of life. It gives the anxious mother the most updated information on education. It supplies the enthusiastic student the hottest news from all schools, and even merges and facilitates the transition from university to getting a job in the real world. So with that, I come back to Gamika, who is going to be talking to us a little bit of what is the best way to extract this data from data analytics, as well as some schools may not have all the data that from the previous years. So for example, they may not have data from 3 years back. How do they work around a situation like that? Or maybe all of it is manual. What would you propose to be a solution in those scenarios?
Absolutely. So two questions there. So to answer the first one, how do we extract this data? So I mean, it largely depends on the way and the platform in which you have stored your data. So I mean, if you are high-flying schools like from like Malith and Asanka, then you already have these platforms already built and these data stored in a particular way. But that being said, let's break it down into what the ideal scenario is and what the least ideal scenario is. So the best case scenario, if you're carrying out, if you're building a next gen system for a school in terms of gathering insight, is for everything to be on one platform. It has to be in one ecosystem as a whole, so that the data that is stored is on the same platform. It shares the same platform as the engine that powers the algorithms, right? So for example, from what I know in Yara Technology, which is with our product in the tech product Talkative Parents, we have the input for our data being what we call a digital report card, and that stores the data which we can pull through to power our algorithms or visualizations, whichever the output that you require. So like I mentioned, the top layer would be for your data to be stored in the same platform that provides the analytics, right? Now, another easy way to do that is if you have an enterprise system like Google Classroom. And the reason is because when you have Google Classroom, Google has been in this game for about 6 to 7 years from 2014, right? So their APIs, application programming interfaces, are extremely well refined and thorough, and they're easy to use and they're easily applicable. In such a case, if you store your data in a system like that, you can quite easily integrate into whatever platform that you're using to extract this insight, right? The less now it starts to get a little bit tricky, but still workable, is if your data is all stored in a third-party platform, which will require you to make custom integrations to that platform, right? Essentially, so if that is the case, then you have to negotiate with third-party platform to figure out if it already offers APIs, in which case it's great. If not, how are we going to get this data out, which is a manual process? And of course, the least ideal and the place where it gets a bit tricky is if you have stored all your grades and scoring or profile data, for example, manually, right? If it's in a paper-based system, then it's a massive uptaking and it's a massive undertaking to convert that into a digital format that will be recognizable by a computer, right? I mean, sort of having everything in an Excel, again, there's a spectrum in whether that's useful or not. So for example, if you as a school have a very high discipline in the way in which you maintain your Excel sheets, the naming conventions, the way in which you maintain the grades of the students and their classes, etc., then it's arguably not a very difficult move to get that data imported into the system that you're running the analysis from. But I mean, if your Excels are all over the place, again, it's going to be as hard an undertaking as it would be for the for the paper related stuff as well. Your other question was if if you haven't got sufficient data, right? So if you haven't got if you have, let's say your question was, if it's 3, 4, 5 years, if you only have maybe 1 year, what will you do with it, right? So to elaborate in context, if you have just 1 year of data, so let's just take the term end of year exams for, say, maths, in maths, English, science, for example, you would have, term 1, term 2, term 3 grades for each of the subjects, but you have no previous base to compare it off of. So you don't have a trend line, you don't have any sort of growth. So the insight is a little bit limited in that sort of context. But I think the broader question we should be asking is not, do you have enough data now, but are you in the journey to build upon this data layer and build upon the technology that you have, so that you will be ready in 3, 4, 5 years. So that's, I think, where the question should be. So I mean, an interesting insight that I learned from a different field altogether in investment banking is some of these big bulge bracket banks. I mean, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, they collect vast arrays of data, and they don't even know what to do with that data. They collect millions of lines of data, and they don't know what it will yield or why they are or what insights it's going to reveal. But they just collect it anyway, and it's with the hope that in 3, 4, 5 years time they will have the leading edge over their competitors, even though maybe even half of the data is meaningless. They just want the edge, so they start building it now. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. So you actually mentioned talkative parents. What does that integration with Google Classrooms do exactly?
Right. Okay. So I mean, the like I mentioned in the previous question, Google has one of the most refined set of APIs at least from an education standpoint, right? They've been in this business for 6 to 7 years. So I mean, we were just chatting around brainstorming ideas, and we were like, hey, Google Classroom is already a built system. It's very robust, as Malith and Asanka and Professor Harshana was mentioning. Why don't we just piggyback on the capabilities of this system, because it just makes more sense, both from Google side and from our side and the school side, right? So what we went ahead was we took the core capabilities that are offered by Google Classroom, and along the lines of what I mean, Asanka and Malith and Professor Harshana was also mentioning, we're trying to tailor it. We're tailoring it into a more developing emerging market context, so that it's easier for the teachers to use. So that's essentially simplifying the customer journey, essentially the user interface and the user experience, so that the teachers don't have to go through, and it's not scary, basically. It's not intimidating to look at. All right. So that dashboard, which we call the Talkative Parents dashboard, is all about simplicity of design, right? And I mean, if what that boils down to are two things: what we call the Google Classroom integrations and the Google Classroom triggers, right? So the Google Classroom integrations are essentially the core features that, I mean, a lot of schools will be using, right? It will be classroom creations, homework assignments, video conferencing, scheduling, etc. And they are all capable of being done by this simplified platform. So so that's the Google Classroom integration that Talkative Parents has done. And then you have what you call the Google Classroom, Google Classroom triggers. So this is essentially a list of core student KPIs that are pushed through the Talkative Parents communication app on things that parents would really like to know. I mean, and this is something, if I remember correctly, Malith was also mentioning that students are now, part of the benefits of this horrible virus coming out is that the parents actually know what their students are doing, what their children are doing from adopting Google Classroom. So we are just taking it one step ahead. We are letting them know more insights. For example, have they been attending the online classrooms effectively? What's their attendance percentage like? What is their homework? Their homework submission rate, right? Is it, if it's below a certain threshold, is something we should notify them of? And general class updates, for example, right? So I mean, fortunately, Google recognized the level of integration that we have done, and subsequently as a result, we are now a Google for Education partner, and also, I mean, after studying extensively the level of integration that we have done with them, we are now also a Google for Education Integrated Solutions Initiative member. I think I got that right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think that hopefully that gives you an idea about our integration level.
With the Google Classroom integration, you can now create a Google Classroom, upload and view homework assignments, and schedule a video class via the Talkative Parents platform. Creating the Google Classroom is a simple two-step process. The class teacher confirms the list of students in her class as registered on the Talkative Parents platform by logging in with her approved Gmail address. The school super admin then logs in to the Talkative Parents platform and creates a Google Classroom for the respective classes. The class is created with the specific naming convention for easy identification by both class teacher and student. The class has now been successfully created. The class teacher can upload an assignment on the Talkative Parents platform by clicking on the Upload Assignment feature and adding a file, photo or link with a due date. The parent will then receive an automated notification on their Talkative Parents app to view the assignment in Google Classroom. The teacher can view assignments submitted by students by selecting Assignment Details on the menu and selecting the particular class and assignment. The assignment can then be downloaded and viewed. The class teacher can select the grade and create a video class. The teacher then enters the title, date, and time to schedule the class. The video class has now been successfully scheduled and added to the student's Google Calendar. The parent will then receive an automated notification on their Talkative Parents app to view or join the video class.
Thank you so much for being so descriptive. And I'm sure that everyone here got a lot of insight on how they can use data in making sure classrooms work well on a daily basis. So with that, we come to our final question. So it was actually very interesting because we just spoke about this before this webinar began, about the impact of children on how Google Classroom can work with them. So as both of your schools have very young, from nursery to kindergarten to year one students, what would be your tips to other educators on how they can make sure this environment is a friendly one for kids like this, and any tips you might have? It is a very tricky question because it's children. It's very hard to keep little ones in front of a screen. But I'm sure something from your experience, if both of you can give us something.
Malith, do you want to take it first?
Okay, sure, Asanka. I think from my kind of like experience, what I saw was the good teachers who handling the little children were able to kind of like keep them engaged during those classes through a lot of activities. You know, little kids like to do knick-knack things with their hands and legs. So as long as, you know, you incorporate a lot of activities, even though you are, you know, on the other side of the screen, kids will be engaged. Whereas, you know, if you have a very lackluster delivery where, you know, you have a whiteboard and you're writing things on it, you can't expect children to remain behind in front of a screen at home. They will walk towards the fridge or the PS4 or, you know, so on. So it's very important that the teachers actually make the class very interactive and engaging for the little children. And also, I think, like what Asanka mentioned earlier, there needs to be plenty of gaps, you know, where, you know, they can actually walk away from the screen, look outside a window, go and pet their doggy and come back and kind of like reboot, because, you know, it's that much more difficult for a little child to be seated in front of a screen for hours and hours. So I think it's very important that, you know, what you call the teachers provide a very interactive session. And also when kids are at home, there must be an adult who is kind of like, you know, ensuring that the child is kept focused. So I think this is where having what you call extended families in our country can be an advantage. You know, in our culture, you still have the grandparents kind of like, you know, helping out the parents with looking after the children. And there has to be some kind of adult supervision happening, because little children will not have intrinsic motivation like a A-level pupil. So it's very important that, you know, someone from the home front, you know, kind of like keeps them settled, provides them with the food and water. And the teacher also knows when to give a break and to have it as a very interactive session. So that's the basic thing I can touch on. I mean, we can go on and on with very complicated strategies, but since time is limited, I would say that's the basic that I would touch upon. Asanka?
Yeah, I would agree exactly with what Malith said. What the thing with little children is two things. One is short attention span, and also they need number two is they need help and guidance. So we need help from the parents to come and perhaps sit beside them, not to interfere with the child's learning, but or anything like that, but just to be there to help him set up the screen, set up things, and just be motivated to do that. But everything is, as Malith said, everything is in the hands of the teacher. The teacher has to make it interesting. It is not about sitting and writing. That it does not work. Right? The entire digital platform does not work. It will fall flat if you're just sitting in front of the screen and reading out a note. That era has gone. So we must move away from note writing and all that. It must be interactive. There must be a lot of animations, a lot of music, videos to watch, and getting them to physically do something. I was told by a certain teacher what she does in classes for about 10 minutes when she realizes that the class is being a little they lost attention a little bit in the class. She says, okay, go outside, find a leaf from a tree and pick it and show it to the class. Then all these children just get up and they run out, and so there's some bit of energy being used, that this leaf is brought and then brought into the class and then discuss about the leaf. See, what our teachers, at least some of our teachers, don't realize is at these ages, at the younger ages, the syllabus should be just chucked out of the window. The syllabus is far too constraining, and you're looking at this box and you're trying to keep everyone in this box. But the children have a lot of energy. we need to utilize that energy and get them to learn. But learning doesn't always have to be inside this textbook. Textbook is only a guideline, but the learning happens right round. So the experience of the teacher and the creativity of the teacher comes into play a lot when it comes to dealing with small children. Yes, you get through the syllabus. Yes, you get through the lessons. You're touching on all that, but that shouldn't define your classroom. And that is a message we keep telling our teachers also. Don't let the syllabus define you, but you define the syllabus according to what is good for the child. So those are some of the things we look at, but it's not always as easy as it sounds. Of course, when it comes to actually doing it, it's far more difficult.
Of course. I'm sure that everyone here has gained a lot of insight from all four of you and can definitely look at now, truly evaluate if Google Classrooms and Talkative Parents, for that matter, is the perfect choice for them. So first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists that we had today. We had Malith Kumarasinghe, Asanka Perera, Gamika, as well as Professor Rambukwella, who have been an integral part of today's webinar. If you have any questions specific to Google Classrooms, you can email Yara Technologies directly, and I'm sure they would definitely love to answer whatever you have. Along with that, the footage of this session will be on their Facebook page, so feel free to go watch it at any time that you feel like, and we hope that you will be a part of the growth of Google Classrooms, and we can look at how blended learning can help Sri Lanka over the long run. So with that, I would like to wish you a good evening, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe. Thank you.
Stay safe.
You too.